Hi, Alex. Welcome to GTM Expertise. Thanks for taking the time.
Of course. It is good to be here and good to see you again.
Awesome. So today we're going to talk a little about how GTM plays a role early in the product lifecycle, and that's a little bit connected to what you're doing right now. But what would be great to hear for the rest of the folks is where you've come from, what your career looks like, and then a bit about what you're doing now. That'd be great.
Perfect. Yeah. So last few years I've been in the crypto blockchain space. So with that, just as a high level overview, I work a lot with basically public and open data. And a lot of what we do is building both infrastructure and applications on top of this open ecosystem. So if you're familiar from a traditional standpoint with a company like Red Hat, that was bought by IBM recently in the $35 billion range. That's a great playbook and I guess anchor to basically keep in mind for what crypto and blockchain is, where you can build a very, very valuable company when you're building applications on top of open data sources and open tech.
Mm,
So
mm.
where you and I met was more on the infrastructure side. That's where I got my start for the first few years within my journey, was companies that were building the infrastructure, like the piping system that a lot of this open source was run on top of. And then in the last year and a half, I've moved more towards the application side, and building applications on top of that infrastructure takes advantage of it and creates a better user experience for whatever that use case might be on top of that. And so for the last few months, I would say we're in the early stages pre-launch for building an application for traders. And once again,
Okay.
this is something where traders could go wherever they really want and be able to access this information themselves, or they could use an application where they pay a small fee on top of it. Consolidates things, it creates a better user experience. And we've seen a lot of proof that users want that experience and are willing to
Mm.
pay for the convenience building on top of that. So that's what I'm doing now.
Awesome, Alex. That's a great intro. And a great setting the stage, I guess, for how we think about GTM at the early stage, is because you're going through or have gone through part of that right now. How do you facilitate the conversations with those early users and understand what their needs are? Like, for those who are out there who are building, like you, they're building early. What are you looking to collect? How are you looking to collect it? And what does it mean for the product?
Right. So I think nothing really replaces talking to actual users themselves. And the more you can talk to those people, and the more conversations you have with people, the thing is, when you're doing that, it's not very scalable and your end value is going to be very, very low. While those conversations can be much richer and it can give you ideas to go down, I think there's no replacement for actual real data. And this is the beauty of being in an open marketplace, is I essentially have access to this open public database with massive amounts of information. And if you know how to query for that information and get creative with how you want to splice that up, you can pull out some interesting insights that give us real feedback, real data on the way that people are already transacting. And that's what I love about this business right now, is we can see the way that users are already behaving. And I think we've all been here where we're asking user, would this be valuable to you? And depending on your relationship with them, a lot of them will just say, yes, that would be valuable to me. But it's very different for them to say that something is valuable and then for them to actually vote with their wallet. And that's what I love about this right now, is I'm spending a bunch of my time from a go-to-market standpoint, pre-product, actually looking at user behavior. Where are users actually transacting? Where are they spending money? That to me is an incredible pool of information for me to say, users are already here, they're already spending money, and I can get really good information on problems that they might still have based on where they are transacting. So that's where I'm spending a lot of my time.
That's exciting because I think in many markets, you're right. Like, the conversation with the customer, a real conversation with the customer, not a lot replaces that. But it sounds like you've got this kind of extra element here where you can use that public data to then inform the conversation a bit better. You already come to the table saying, "I know you're spending money on this already,"
Exactly.
and it's already like 2 or 3 steps ahead of where you would be from a kind of typical early customer interview. How are you doing that? How does that like play into the product roadmap, like what you're building first, what you're focused on? How do you weight all of that? Like, in terms of you get all this feedback. Like, how do you start to pick through that and understand what's real and what's also important for your business?
Right. Yeah, we see a lot of competitors not really being very disciplined about what that one thing is going to be for their product. And they'll build a bunch of different things and they're hoping that one of those things is going to be something that actually people care about. like with most things, there's not an even distribution on what people really care about. There's this kind of Pareto distribution of like 80% of users are going to be using 20% of the features. And the idea is to not have to build all those features. It's just to build that 20% that 80% of the users are going to like. So how do you actually know? How do you actually know for sure? And we are kind of taking a bit of a gamble, and we are seeing that in this market right now. The market has been bundled up within this product category, and we think it's due for an unbundling and creating more specialized types of products and having users be able to modularly pull those together to create whatever experience that they really want to. So that's the gamble that we're kind of taking. This comes from like Chris Dixon, I think, is the one who coined this, the bundling and the unbundling, talking about traditional media was bundling, and then with the internet you were able to unbundle it, and now with all these different streaming platforms, it's like maybe we're going back into a bundling era. So this is kind of what we're seeing right now within our categories. We're taking this bet that we are going to decouple this one particular aspect that we think most users are really going to be caring about. We are anchoring that as much as possible based on real transaction history. If we have a thesis here, where within different categories can we test this thesis based on real data? When you change this particular factor, do you see users' behavior differently in this one way? And you're kind of doing this hypothesis testing with real data. So even in closed systems, my recommendation is wherever possible, we're in a world now where there's so much data out there. And while it might not be free and open in some other places, you can purchase it. It is many times very valuable to get your hands on that data however possible so that you're grounded in reality. And you're not, even if you're doing user interviews, you're not starting with an end value of like 20. And you can still get data that gives you thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of data points that gives you a much more confidence that your thesis is correct because it's grounded in reality.
That's really, I really like the bundling, unbundling sort of description, because I feel like that comes to a market maturity as well, I suppose, in many ways. Like, the space that you're working in now has been, it's still early in many ways, right? In a lot of ways, but it's also quite mature. There's been a huge amount of sort of progress made across the entire market, and it's sort of natural in that phase that the end customer wants a bundled offering because there's a lot of things to pull together. But then as that matures and as they get more, your customer gets more sophisticated, is the idea then for you that what you're being provided, your customer will tie that together with other kind of maybe best of breed or at least other unbundled solutions? Is that how you view it? Okay.
Correct. That's what we're seeing out in the market. Is there are a lot of open and easily accessible aspects on like the research and analytics standpoint. And we are seeing users already pull together each of these different tools into their own workflow. And so instead of us trying to get to feature parity on the analytics piece, which is the kind of free hook that a lot of these competitors will have, let's let users already use those tools that are already out there. There's a rich feature set. Let's not waste our time trying to get to feature parity there. Let's talk about and focus on the execution piece, the actual transaction that is the thing that people pay money for. And when you ruthlessly focus in on that, it's just crazy to me how that is not something that has a lot of feature richness or even like consistency and high quality, when it's like that is the main thing that people are paying for. And we just think there's a fundamental mismatch in what competitors are offering and what users would really, really care about. And that's the thesis that we're taking. We have proof based on public data. And when we go to market, it's just a matter of how do we, from a marketing standpoint, now we're actually going to market, how do we get people to ruthlessly focus on that one thing? And in my experience is if you have more than one thing, you have dozens of things, it's very difficult to anchor that idea in people's minds that this brand equals all of these different things. It's a lot easier to say this brand equals this one thing. Yes. It becomes much, much easier from a go-to-market standpoint that me being in go-to-market and being involved early on, I feel very confident that we are right on this one thing. And it becomes a lot easier to sell and market on that one thing versus this suite of things and keeping all of those things anchored in people's mind.
Yeah, I think I've seen that quite a bit in various spaces, particularly in the B2B space, where I guess this concept of like product feature stuffing is really tempting when you're a tech startup, because you can build a lot of things. And today, man, can you build anything you want, like a lot quicker than you used to be able to. However, being known for and having that as part of your brand and having that as your hook and your pull and what you're known for, it's easily possible later that you end up bundling together your unbundled solution and branching out and providing that, right? But what you're saying is to get to that gateway, you start with this kind of single promise, I guess. What are the trade-offs there for you in a go-to-market position when likely you do have competitors that are bundled together. How do you weigh that up in a go-to-market perspective?
Yeah, I think we have plans to expand the feature set later on, but I
Yeah,
think what we want to make sure is, even though we have real data in this public databases for us to anchor our thesis in, we won't know for sure until we go to market. And then it's either like, are we not getting traction because of our marketing, or are we not getting traction because of our product? And when you have
right.
fewer factors, it becomes more scientific for you to say you're controlling for all of these different variables, versus if you're coming to market with a slew of features, it becomes much more difficult to say
It does.
to answer that question. So for us, it's like, how do we get to market faster and
Yeah,
test this one factor? And then it just becomes, what are the things that we can A/B test in the marketing go to market side? And then we have this one particular product category. Then it becomes fewer things, and we become more confident on what are the things that really need to be tweaked. And we have some ideas for where we're going to expand the feature set, but we also want to have that grounded in reality and have users kind of to prove that to us, so that we can actually prioritize the next build outs in a way that is grounded in user needs.
yeah, 100%. And there's a very, very common sort of operational model of thinking about what users might need and planning for that. But I think you're going to get a whole wave of just great information when you actually go to launch. How does that change for you then? So at the moment you're in pre-launch and you're in that mode, right? Post-launch, now you've got users, you've got a product that's in market. How does that change for you in terms of feedback? What are you looking for? How are you going to get that feedback? What are you measuring? What's important to you? Like, that'd be
Right.
great to hear.
Right. So the public database that I've been talking about before
Mm,
has certain information, but then there's also other information that is behind closed doors from the application standpoint. So once
sure.
we actually get something live, we can see how many users are signing on. How often are they signing on? What is like the daily active user count? How many people are signing in on a daily basis? 2 days in a row, 3 days in a row, 4 days in a row, and you can see that change over time. You can see where people are clicking. You can see what features that they're using and which ones that they're not really using.
Mm,
And now we can start to get enriched data that is not public and open from our competitor standpoint. And start to see the way that users are behaving right now. And we can do these small little experiments saying, let's build kind of a new MVP feature set within this particular product category. And when we announce that and we let people know that it exists, are people actually clicking into that? If they're not,
yep.
it then becomes these two things. That feature is either not valuable or people don't know about it in some factor. And we can continue to push in that area. And instead of us coming to market with all these different features and making all these assumptions, we are starting with one, testing that thesis, building on top of that, giving people a little bit. And especially in this market, users are completely overwhelmed with competitors, they're just bombarded with information. So the last thing we want to do is be the ones that are bombarding them with more
Mm,
information. We think
mm,
less is more. These are one of these
yeah.
other theses that we're testing is, let's be very, very confident that this one thing is something that's valuable to them. We
Yeah.
test it. And then we do not want to confuse them. We do not want to overwhelm them with information, because constantly what we see is you have this like decision fatigue, and the more options you have, the more likely
Yep.
you are to just stay with the status quo. And I think that's super important from a marketing and sales standpoint, is reduce the options as much as possible, get it to 3 max, and
Yep.
then it's easier for people to actually change their behavior. Where if it's overly complicated, status quo is overwhelmingly,
Absolutely.
it's the default path by definition.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I can see that kind of play out in rapid experimentation. What you're really talking about there is, and we have the tools now to do that, which is great. Where you've got your core product, and you can very quickly experiment with any part of that chain, whether it's the marketing, whether it's the go-to-market motion, whether it's the product itself, the product feature set, the cohort that you're dealing with, whether they get it as a premium add-on or whether it's a free add. Like, there's so many different variables, but you can rapidly experiment, and using data like you really are focusing in on makes a lot of sense in this day and age. Do you have any sort of, I don't know, do you have any fears that this focusing in on this one thing will take you down a path that will be harder to move off? There's a huge opportunity to pivot these days, and very, very quickly if you need to. Do you have that in your mind? How does your sort of go to market head in that area?
Right. So, a few things here that come to mind. One, I think it's this could be a whole other conversation itself. But one is with being an early stage company and being a small, lean company,
Yeah.
you the amount of like LLMs, ChatGPT, Claude, Anthropic, everything, all of those, the amount that
Yeah.
we use that on a daily basis is getting absolutely ridiculous. And the best description for AI that I've heard that still rings true is that having these LLMs at your disposal is like having 1,000 interns at your
Sure.
whim. And the best way to use this is with, if you have interns, is to be as explicit as humanly possible on what you want. And the quality of responses that the outputs that you're going to get is directly related to the quality
Yeah.
of your inputs and how detail oriented that you are. So
Yeah.
how it comes back to answering your question here is that we can afford to have a very lean, small team. And we have our burn rate is not as high as it would be for traditionally to build something like this. And when it comes back to like, what is the risk? Like, what if we're wrong? And if we go to market and this doesn't work out, then you can pivot because people don't know who you are. It doesn't even seem like a pivot. You're a brand new thing. It's a fresh start, really. And then two is if you have a very lean team and you're smart with where you're spending your money, the actual cost itself to being wrong is lower than it ever has been before. Now,
Totally.
whether you're VC money, whether you're bootstrapped, whatever, these two factors make it a lot easier to quickly iterate, test things, be grounded in reality. And then
Yeah.
if you are wrong, then be able to pivot. And the cost is as low as it ever has been.
Absolutely. This is really refreshing to hear because I think a lot of startup founders out there are in various stages of funding, which does apply levels of pressure, which forces you perhaps to have an unrealistic conviction around what you think is going to happen. Or some sort of artificial conviction that you shouldn't be pivoting. You should just go as far as you can until you crash and burn. I think one of the benefits, like you're saying, in the technology that we have today is to be able to make many mistakes as cheaply as possible. And I think that's just great life advice too, right? I mean, to be honest, I've learned that way in various parts of my life. And I think that's, it's
Me
not a
too.
bad way to run a startup too. And it's great, right? And it's about rapid experimentation as cheaply as possible so you can learn quicker and not stay on this kind of long, winding, more enterprise path, I suppose, more corporate path, get really lean and quick. So that's really cool. I like that.
Yeah. A no now is better than a no later. So the faster you can know that for sure,
Yeah.
the better you
Yeah.
can move on. And within sales and marketing, everyone listening to this knows that, I mean, the success rate is lower than, a baseball batting average,
Sure.
Failure is the default path. So it's like, if that's the default path, you might as well fail faster and cheaper. And that's what I think these tools allow us to do is it allows our success rate to go up. And when we do fail, the cost is as low as possible and you can iterate more quickly. So that's kind of the filter through which I'm looking at this is how do you narrow the factors as much as possible? And if you are going to fail, at least learn from it. And if you have all of these factors present, if you go to market with all these features, you don't really learn much. You don't know what part was wrong,
Yep.
and you can't really learn from that and move on. And failure is overwhelmingly the most common piece. So at the very least, you want to learn so you can increase the chances of success at the next pivot.
Totally. That brings me on to a kind of point about how you test that, and it comes beyond a bit the product, right? So you already talked quite a bit about how you look at validating whether the product will fit your kind of thesis of where your product's going to go and where your company's going to go. What about the commercials? What about the commercial price sensitivity? What about how you understand what your users will pay, and also how they will pay? Is it subscription fee? Is it transaction based or a mixture of whatever it is? How do you go and do that with your potential user base, and how are you planning to do that? That'd be really interesting.
So what's nice about this industry is it's while this industry is a younger industry in itself, there are parallels back to traditional finance. So this is kind of what I'm in is like fintech, right? So fintech is this combination of the new technology. It's like a new way of doing something that is a very old industry. Finance is one of the oldest industries. So we have a lot of history to pull from on the way pricing is being done. What are people's price sensitivity? How does that correlate with volume and maturity of the market? And we can start to see parallels and predict the future, I think, to me, a little bit more easily than something that is completely like a black box like AI, where you're like, we're in
Sure.
totally uncharted territory. We don't necessarily know what's going to happen. So we're in a different market here where, one, we have a bunch of different competitors. We have users who are already transacting on certain other applications. We have public information on how those users are transacting. And we have a history of apps that are similar from another category that we can kind of at least say this is probably the direction that these are going to go. And that might be different from some of these bushwhacking type of areas where you're really carving the path yourself and you don't know where
Yeah.
we're going to end up. And I would say in those, like, experimentation is even more important because you have to rapidly iterate all of these different things and see what people are biting on. Where here, it's like we're controlling for so many variables. We have a lot of history and our confidence level becomes higher and higher, maybe dangerously so. It's constantly my biggest issue is like, am I missing something?
Sure.
But at least it's somewhat grounded on all of these different pieces that to me increases the probability that we are right. So I'd say that is a like a luxury within this industry. Now, with that luxury comes there's a lot of competition. And when you have a lot of competition, you have to be ruthless about what your differentiator is, which comes back to my original point of like, how, if we're going through the unbundling route, how do we make sure that people see us with this one identity so that it cuts through all of that different noise? Like if you're in MarTech, for example, it's like there are a million MarTech platforms out there. Or if you're a CRM, there's a million
Yep.
out there. So how do you become known for that one thing that's going to make or break the difference, where it's like there is a subset of users who have this particular problem, they care about this thing, and our goal is to find those particular users who are already spending money and get them to know that this exists, hook them, get them to try it out.
Yeah.
And if the product is there and it's good, then a certain percentage of those people are going to stay. And then what our thought is that based on this category, you're going to create net new users, that TAM is going to increase, and we're going to create net new demand. But the first things first, we want to say, how do we capture that existing demand? Because we know it's out there, users are spending money. Let's get that first, and then we can worry about how we're going to get the wider message out and create net new demand.
And you're thinking about this. I think we talked a little about this earlier, but like, are you talking about segmenting your users in some ways so that you have this kind of more mass market offering and then perhaps a more premium offering? And how does that compare in terms of, because that's a different go-to-market in many ways, right? If you've got a sort of more consumer offering, this will map very well to a B2B who's got some sort of like starter or express or whatever you want to call it package. And then they also have at the other end of the scale a custom enterprise pricing methodology, which is a lot more for bigger teams, bigger organizations. Are you along that path too? And how are you thinking about how you divide that up?
Right. So I'd say the pricing strategy that we have is probably more akin to like a tax rate. So do you have a flat tax? Do you have a progressive tax? Do you have a regressive tax? So the way that we've opted for right now from a simplicity standpoint is it is just a flat tax, regardless of how much, and it is all based on volume. So if you do this much in volume, it is always X percent of that total volume is cut as a fee. Now, there are ways that you can experiment with that. And this comes down to like the pricing strategy, commercials. How do you test different things? Maybe we want to test a regressive fee structure. So the more volume that you do, then your percentage actually comes down. And we see some variations of this within the market. And I think for us to go to market, we are going for simplicity first. And that could come down to later on, we want to actually create these different tiers. Maybe there's a way where you can white label. Instead of us having the UI, we've already built this backend infrastructure for this. Maybe we can actually white label that tech to someone else, bring the fee way down, and we make up for that in volume. There's all these different areas, or there's another area within the total transaction stack that is also has its issues, and we have some opinions on where we could help improve that stack. And instead of just owning the user experience, we can build out more infrastructure down there, simplify that, make it so it is, it's unbundled. We have here's the one value prop for us within that vertical, solve that problem. And then now we're solving that problem even more completely for the subset of users, the persona who we are saying is like our main persona. And we don't want to just own the entire market and overcome all incumbents within the competitive stack. We want to say there's one user who is already spending money, who is who has these particular problems. And there are probably users who aren't spending money because it's not as big of a problem, who
Sure.
would spend money if it was solved in the particular way that they want to solve it. And so that's where we're getting that narrow focus down and saying this user has this particular problem. This is our customer. We're not going to worry about all of the other users. And we're going to keep it as simple as humanly possible to start so that there's no confusion. We don't want people doing like, how do I calculate this on this pricing? It's like, that's the simple part. This is the problem that you have. And we're optimizing for simplicity. And then later on, we can focus on different pricing strategies as we have the happy problem of having a lot of.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's the right way to look at it for many startups is focus on where your core is, right? Your core market, what your persona is. If you want to reach either different personas or just personas which are harder to reach that are within your capture, you then start to look at white labeling. You've got, an API first method, whether you've got a channel partner, whether you've got partners that will help you get to that reach later. I think there's a very common way of attacking that kind of thing. So segmenting it that way makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Maybe to wrap a bit, Alex, like before this, you focused on a lot of sales and product and in various markets as well as in the space you're in now. How do you kind of focus? Because you always bring a lot of stuff to the table. You're in this market. You want to go as fast as is reasonably possible in this market, but you've got a lot of noise as well with lots of different things telling you what to do. You've got all your interns, as you call them, telling you lots of different things too, right? How do you focus as a founder? Like, how do you focus on what to do next and what informs that strategy? Because I think that's just like a more of a human thing. Right now, we've got more information than we've ever had. As a startup founder, it's never been more important just to focus and to kind of block out the noise. So how do you do that?
Yeah. In my industry in particular, there's a notorious amount of noise, and there are very vocal, very confident, and oftentimes very wrong people. So you almost get negative signal a lot of times. And I think for me, the biggest thing within my industry is like, if you're only listening to sentiment on things like X about this, you can get pulled in a lot of different directions. Like I mentioned, there's a ton of different noise, and having that like grounded in reality on how are people actually transacting and having public data, that to me is the core. And I've talked about that. I think when you're thinking about what's next, that's where it becomes, okay, who are the people within my market who are thinking differently, and in finding who those people are and being extremely ruthless about where you are consuming information from. And this is going to get so much worse with AI generated content. It is just going to be a rehashing of the same things. AI does have its place, but like I mentioned, it's like 1,000 interns. Are you going to be asking them for a research paper from 1,000 interns? It's like, well, maybe to pull some information together, but you're going to take that with a grain of salt. You just want them to curate that and reduce noise, right? So you have to be very, very careful about who and what you are consuming information from, and treat it like food. Like, I'm very big on seeing information as food, is like, you are what you eat. If you are a glutton for it, your brain is going to get fat and you're not going to know how to sort through all that information. If you're consuming junk food, then you're going to think like junk. If you're consuming very high quality and limited information, that is going to start to shape your heuristics to say, I like the way this person is thinking. They have a track record of success. I see the things that they are saying come to fruition. And then in addition to it's all grounded in data, all grounded in reality, but that gives you a current state. And then combined with this information and this lean diet and very, very disciplined diet of where you're consuming information from, you can start to see, this is where I think the puck is going. And it's based on reality of how users are transacting right now. Then you can start to make really, really good decisions on, I'm going to take a bet on this based on the way people are transacting right now, and based on this heuristic on how I think things are going to change in the future. And we're in an exponential age. I am overwhelmed constantly because there's so much information out there and the world is changing so rapidly. But the thing is, if you make the right call, if you make the right decisions, there's a lot on the table up for grabs. That's what makes it exciting. And the more you can shorten your world and shrink your world, the more likely you are to be right within your small category. So that would be my recommendation for predicting where the puck is going to go.
I love that. I think that's a really great way to wrap up. I think the concept that you can relate that to food and as a startup founder is a really good one. I think for anyone actually, frankly, these days in terms of what you consume, but to focus and to bring that back is super. That was great, Alex. Thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. I wish you all the best with your next journey, and we'll be watching along from GTM expertise. So thanks for your time again, Alex.
I appreciate it. It was good to catch up. Thank you for having me on.
Cheers, Alex. Bye.
Cheers.